webradio.com.
Hey, what's going on, everybody in cyberspace? This is The Groove Show with your boy, the Crowd Pleaser, DJ Mark Anthony. Don't forget, each and every Saturday afternoon from 4 to 6 p.m., we want to put you in the mood for whatever the night has in store. I'm playing only the best feel-good party rockin', body-shaking music from funk to soul to reggae to R&B, house to salsa, and much, much more. We call it The Groove each and every Saturday from 4 to 6 p.m. Keep it locked. It's the Crowd Pleaser, baby. You know how we do. We'll see you on the air. Peace.
The internet's number one on the World Wide Web. iLive Radio.
Come on out to the 905 Comedy Fest, Friday, September 11th to Sunday, September 13th in Ajax at the St. Francis Centre at 78 Church Street South, showcasing Canada's best stand-up comedians benefiting the funny thing about cancer. Comedy all-stars include Yuck Yuck's Nubian Show host Kenny Robinson, CBC's Alan Park, the Food Network's host of Eat Street, James Cunningham, Comedy Award winner and MTV host Graham Chittenden, and many more. Tickets are $35 and you can save 40% by entering the coupon code. For more information and to purchase your tickets, go to www.905comedy.com. Don't miss it.
Welcome to the show, everyone. This week we are going to be talking a little bit about something that runs deep within Canada, and that is state of affairs within the Aboriginal community. Hey, Nailah, you know, over the last little while, there's been some conversations about truth and reconciliation. Mm-hmm. There's been some talk about the I Don't Know More movement. Right. You know, I don't know. Do you know much about this? Most of what I learned about it was just listening to CBC radio and hearing some of the things that they've talked about it.
Same. I'm not well versed in it. I know that it is a pretty big issue. I know that there's Mrs. Universe 2015 has a lot to say to our current Prime Minister about the state of Aboriginal affairs.
That's true. She's been very vocal.
Yeah, she has been. So yeah, I think it's a pretty hot topic right now.
I've wanted to do this type of show, just talking about the particular challenges within the within that community for a little while now, and I've been rather lucky to be able to be connected with Jason, and he brought along a friend, Pamela. I got it right? Okay. And so he's with the organization that's it's called Bear Standing Tall and Associates. And if you just grab the mic there, speaking to the mic, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about your organization. And then you said you wanted to open up with a song.
Yes. Hi, my relatives. My name is Bear Standing Tall. My spirit name is Muskwa Nsugapu. And I'm Indigenous Cree from Saskatchewan. And this is my wife, Pamela Carter. And I'll let you introduce yourself.
Red Medicine Woman Wian Pajitaluta.
So before we begin, I would like to offer a song with our traditional hand drums, because when we do our work from an Indigenous lens, we like to start with a song, and it's a prayer song. And this song is dear to our hearts because we're both, we practice our culture, mm-hmm. and we're embracing our identity. And as Indigenous people, we like to use our tools when we do our sharing of this knowledge. All right?
Okay.
And this prayer song is translated as, this is why I do this work. It's so my people will live, and I want to be suffering, and that's why I'm doing this work that I do with Bear Standing Tall and Associates, is to educate non-Indigenous people about Indigenous people and our philosophies, using the medicine wheel and the truth and reconciliation. All right?
Great.
Hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, 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 hey,
really
for sharing
cool.
that with us. And what are some of the words from the song?
Some of the words of the song means, this is why I do this. When a sun dancer gets pierced on a tree and he suffers for those 4 days at the sun dance, he does that to suffer for his people, so his people will have a better life, to improve the quality of life for the human family, as well as the four-legged, the swimmers, the crawlers, the ones that fly. Because we believe that we're all related to everything. We're all connected to the land. And we're connected to Mother Earth. We don't just say the planet. We believe that this place that we live on, Turtle Island, is also known as Canada. But from an Indigenous perspective, this is called Mother Earth. She's like our mother, and we love her so much that we want to be able to do some work for our mother, and stand up for her, and do the best that we can, because we believe that life is short, and so we want to do whatever we can while we're on this in this physical being.
We've got a bunch of questions to go through. Before we do though, there's really one thing that I'd like us to talk a little bit about, and being a person of color, there's over the years, as a black male, culturally we've been called many different names. There's a point in time we were called colored, some more derogatory things, black person, Negro, lots of different names that were associated with us. With Indigenous people within Canada and in the U.S., there's been a similar transitions in terms of how you identify yourself versus how society identifies you. I know the word Aboriginals is used a lot. Indigenous peoples is used a lot. From as an original person, from North America. What is the respectful way for people who are listening to be able to identify your culture, your history, who you are?
For me, I'm a Nahio, and I'm from Onion Lake, Saskatchewan, and our people we identify ourselves as Nehiyawak, the people of the land. And my wife, Pamela, Red Medicine Woman, she's from the West Coast, and I'll let her talk a little bit about who you are.
Our territory's called New Channel.
And like when you go back in time, when the government applied the assimilation policies in order to take our land, and they used whatever they could to destroy us and for us to disappear. And so when they painted a broad brush and called us Indians, but we weren't actually Indians, because we're more or less distinct nations with different territories. So you have Nehiyawak, and this territory is the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe. So back in Saskatchewan we're called Nehiyawak, but there's also Dene and there's Blackfoot, and they have their own way of describing who they are.
Okay. So your organization exists really to educate other people about your culture, your history, who you are.
Yes.
How long have you been doing this? How long has your organization been around?
Okay, well, here's a little brief history. Back in 1997, when I was recovering from alcohol and drugs, I turned to my culture for healing, and I wanted to learn about who I was. And so I asked this elder to give me a spirit name. And so we went into the ceremony, and we went into the sweat lodge, and then we did a couple rounds there, and then he said, your spirit name is Bear Standing Tall. And so that was back in 1997. And so in my language, in the Cree language, it's Muskwa and Sugapu, like the bear stands up for a reason.
Mm.
And so that really helped me to identify myself with the spirit world. So when I say my prayers and I say I identify myself as Musquam Sugapu, because of my strong connection with the unseen world, and that really helps me with doing my work that we do as Bear Standing Tall and Associates. We decided to do some work, and it was all based on a dream that I had. I had this dream that I was carrying this tire, this wheel. I was in this truck with this person, and the wheel fell off, and we were going up this mountain, and this wheel fell off, and then I went and got that wheel, and I couldn't fix it, so we kept going up to this mountain. I didn't know why I was going up there, but I took this wheel, and I was carrying it up, and I almost fell over the side of the mountain. And I guess now I know it was a spirit that was guiding me up the mountain. And I remember thinking, why is it so hard to carry this wheel? Why am I even carrying this wheel up the mountain? It doesn't make no sense. And so I made it to the top, and on the top of that mountain was flat. And I would start shaking hands with my relatives up there, and they were indigenous people. And one of them was angry, and I extended my hand, and because I was shaking hands, and that I said to that person, well, you don't have to shake my hand now because I'm going to be around for a long time. And then somebody from those people took me to this big tent, and there was a huge tent there, and he showed me the corner of the tent, and there was a table there, and there was papers there, and he said, this is where you're going to do your work. And right away I thought about, okay, this is where I'm going to teach the medicine wheel.
Mm-hmm.
And then he said, this tent can go anywhere you want. It doesn't have to stay here. And then in the morning I talked to my wife, Pamela, and I explained to her my dream. And after we talked about it, we realized, hey, that spirit is guiding me to do this work.
Mm-hmm.
And so my wife and I both together, we both work with supporting indigenous people in healing and wellness, and mainly alcohol and drug counseling for our people. And my wife's been doing this kind of work for 20 years. And my wife was involved with supporting her family through the Truth and Reconciliation process.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a process called IAP, and that stands for it was a process where you had to go in front of the courts and tell your story.
Mm-hmm.
in front of the courts, and they talked about sexual abuse and physical abuse and emotional abuse, and then you had to really spill your guts. And so it was
that was a part of the Truth and Reconciliation?
That was part of the process,
okay.
to get compensation
Mm-hmm.
for that. And so Pamela's been working with indigenous people on the downtown east side in Vancouver, working with the people, helping people to have balance and to have, like she did all kinds of work with many people for many years. So, and with my experience learning the medicine wheel and being a sun dancer for 10 years and going to university most of my life, and working right across Canada in treatment centers, wellness centers, detox centers, and always focusing on working with our people. And so all that combined, and I wanted to just say that all my education is indigenized,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that the certificates that I earned are to work with indigenous people. The diploma I have is Native addiction worker. The degree that I have is First Nation, Bachelor of First Nations and Aboriginal counseling degree. And
Mhm.
then I went to further that with a Master of Social Work Holistic Practitioner, which actually helped me to be a strong believer in looking back at history and finding what it is that our people have endured, like the resilience that our people have endured.
So you have, it sounds like you have a wealth of experience and knowledge in and around.
So we
subject.
bring that into our program through an Indigenous lens. It's based on the way I was taught by my family and where I worked. And so when we talk about the medicine wheel, we talk about the four directions, the grandfathers that sit in the four directions. And we talk about the 4 stages of life. We talk about the 4 personalities, the 4 colors of the human family, the 4 seasons, the 4 aspects of nature, the 4 medicines. And we talk about the true history of colonization on Turtle Island from an Indigenous point of view. And it's not from the internet, and it's not from university professors. It comes from us, the grassroots people here of Turtle Island. What did we learn? And a lot of our information comes from the website trc.ca, and that's the Truth and Reconciliation website. And what we do is we share what is the real history of what happened, the assimilation process, and the Indian residential schools, and how we're affected as children of the survivors. And so it's a 40-hour program, and anybody that has a strong desire to learn about the Circle of Life medicine wheel, and anybody that wants to know the real truth about the history of colonization should take our program, because they're going to get the meat and potatoes of what happened. And we also incorporate an elder in our program, and our elder is he's a survivor of the residential school, so he brings a wealth of inside knowledge. And a lot of this knowledge is all oral. It's not written anywhere. So you get first-hand information, and you learn about the way we do it is in a holistic approach. We talk about the mental, the physical, the spiritual, and the emotional. And how do we heal, and how do we move forward from this trauma that's going around?
You mentioned a couple times the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and I mentioned it as well. And you said you brought along a video clip that you can play.
Yes.
That would kind of give people that are watching and listening
a little bit more. You want to see the video now?
Yeah, I think it would be a good time for you to play the video.
The video is 4 minutes, and it's from the Commissioner, Dr. Marie Wilson, and she describes it so well. And yeah, if you're ready. She
was commissioned to do this, or what was her role?
She was part of the Truth and Reconciliation committee, and Marie Sinclair was the judge that was appointed to spearhead that Truth and Reconciliation.
Okay. Jason, are we good to go? Okay.
It's important to note that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada is unique among all TRCs in the world. We are the first and only one that has ever been created because of the actions of the so-called victims of harms. It was the former students who, when they were children, had no power, no voice to do or say anything about what was happening to them. And for many, many years, their parents didn't either, because the Indian Act had such restrictions in it that their parents were not allowed to take action. In fact, were threatened with jail, and some did go to jail if they tried to do anything contrary to the government and church policies about their children being in the schools. But those laws gradually changed. As of 1960, Aboriginal people in Canada finally had the right to vote in Canada and in federal elections. A number of major Indigenous organizations formed, and the voice of individual and collective Indigenous peoples became a force that could not be ignored, and that had a vehicle to get itself before the Canadian courts. And so that's what happened. The individual survivors, as they're called, and then eventually several together in what became a massive class action lawsuit, the largest class action lawsuit in Canadian history, came before the Canadian courts and said what happened to us was not right and we need redress. One of the provisions of a massive out-of-court settlement involving the federal government, 4 national churches, the Catholic entities, several of them, the Anglican Church of Canada, the United Church of Canada, and the Presbyterian Church in Canada, as well as the Assembly of First Nations and the Inuit Tapiri Kanatami. They all, and of course the legal representatives for the survivors themselves, they agreed to this massive out-of-court settlement, and one of the provisions which the survivors themselves fought very hard for was the creation of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. They realized that with an out-of-court settlement, they would never have their day in court, as it were, so there would never be a public record of their side of the story of what had happened to them. Meanwhile, the churches over the many decades, the federal government over the many decades had kept lots of written records and documentation, so that side of the story, the adult side of the story, if I can put it that way, was well documented and available, but the children's side of the story didn't exist. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission then first and foremost created a vehicle for those children, now adults, to tell us and teach us the truthful history from their perspective of what had happened to them as little children, what the residential schools had meant to them, their families, and their own subsequent families, and the kind of connective tissue, if I can put it that way, between what happened to them historically and the reality that we see in so much of Canada today about the challenges that are facing so many individuals that we see on the streets of our urban settings, so many of the communities that are living in the absence of some of the basic and fundamental things that are needed, housing, water, and certainly educational outcomes, but also to provide a platform for demonstrating unbelievable courage, unbelievable resilience, the bravery with which people have come forward and spoken from the depths of their heart and sometimes extremely dire experiences, to be able to say today, this is what I have done, this is how I have reclaimed my life, this is how I am reclaiming my life, and this is what I want our country and our world to learn from this experience.
Sounds like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission covered a lot of information. From your perspective, what are some of the key things that the general public really need to be aware of? So, the everyday, call it the quote-unquote everyday Canadian walking down the street, they may hear about this, they might tune out, they may not be thinking about it, but from your perspective, what are some of the key things that came out of this commission that you would say that we really need to be aware of, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, there's a number of things that we can do, and the Maurice Sinclair, he when he was doing his when they did that study, they came up with calls to action. Mm-hmm. And in this calls to action, this is also on the trc.ca website. It's a document with 94 recommendations, and it's the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada calls to action. And so I wanted to share with you some of the things that I just highlighted here. Mm-hmm.
I don't think we have time for all 94 of them, but some of the key ones.
I just highlighted a few here.
No problem.
There was a call to action to child welfare. Mm-hmm. So currently there's approximately 40,000 Indigenous children in foster homes, and that's a lot. And this is what we can do to help with that.
Okay.
So the Truth and Reconciliation.
So 40,000 children across Canada.
Right across Canada
are in foster care.
Wow.
We call upon the federal, provincial, territorial, and Aboriginal governments to commit to reducing the number of Aboriginal children in care, and then they have a list of the recommendations. Mm-hmm. And the education calls to action.
Before you go on to that, but in terms of the children that are in care, did they talk about some of the reasons as to why there are so many children in care? Is it a child welfare system issue that your culture is being looked at differently? I know one of the things that came out of the report was that the whole residential school thing, where children were taken out of the care of their families and placed in the care of the church.
Right.
But today, for those 40,000 children that are in care, did it talk about why it is that there's so many?
Well, from what I understand, there's still the policies that are basically governing how the social workers work with Indigenous families.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the calls to action are to educate the social workers on the history of residential school and the effects, and
Mm-hmm.
and some of their policy doesn't fit with our people.
Okay.
And so when a social worker goes to a family, they just automatically go through a questionnaire, and if there's one little indication,
Mm-hmm.
if there's no food in the fridge, for example, then there's a red flag.
Okay.
And if there's no phone, that's another thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of these children are yanked out of the home, and that's the way it's been for the longest time, And our people are still healing from the effects of residential school
Mm-hmm.
through poverty and addiction and violence, and it goes on and on and on. Lack of housing, poor water,
Mm-hmm.
and it goes on and on and on. It's like our people are living in like third world conditions in some places,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a lot of places, remote communities up north, they don't even have internet, and the price of food and gas and everything, you're pretty well living in poverty. So when you have the social work policies trying to work with the people, they just yank the children right out of the home.
Okay.
It's really sad the way things are working.
All right. So you were saying education was the next thing that was in there?
Yeah, there was a call to action to provide sustainable funding for existing and new Aboriginal healing centers to address the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual harms caused by the residential school. So that's where Bear Standing Tall comes into play too, because our program is a holistic approach.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about tools for recovery, the medicine wheel is what teaches us to heal. When we have that understanding of our relationship to the land, how we're related to the air, the rock, the fire, the trees, and how we go back to the land for healing,
Mm-hmm.
and to strengthen our identity. And so I think a lot of teachers and educators should have that knowledge of the effects of residential school,
Mm-hmm.
and how our Indigenous people are connected to the land and have that strong connection to the land. And here's another one.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, can I just ask a
Sure.
quick question? So Bear Standing Tall, you guys work across Canada, or you?
Yeah, we can do community-based training. So if
And-
somebody from way up in, I don't know, Thunder Bay
Mm-hmm.
calls on us to go there, we can go there. And our program is designed to, like that dream I had, that person said, you can take this program anywhere you want.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what that community-based training is all about.
Okay.
Okay.
Also, the TRC calls on the Federation of Law Societies in Canada to ensure that lawyers receive appropriate cultural competency training. Again, it goes into learning about who we are, our history, the true history of colonization, not the sugar-coated version you get from going to, regular school, then you go to university and it's all sugar-coated. And when we bring our knowledge into the circle, people are shocked. They're like, I didn't know they did that. I didn't know they had an electric chair. And they did, because our people that we bring into the circle seen it.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen it happen.
Oh.
And commit to eliminating the over-representation of Aboriginal people in custody over the next decade. So as you're familiar with,
that's a pretty big one.
Indigenous
Yeah.
people are the highest over-representation in the federal and provincial system,
Mm-hmm.
correctional system, and these recommendations are is giving them kind of like what is the healing approach. You know, there should be alternatives to just putting somebody in jail and locking them up, but they should be kind of like put in a healing place, you know, where they can have access to an elder, have access to a sweat lodge, have access to ceremony, have access to going back to the land, and really taking a long, hard look at the holistic approach to how they would live their life.
I have a question in and around that, because
Sure.
I know there's been a lot of concern within the Aboriginal community about Bill C-51, and you know, I know over the past few years, Stephen Harper spent quite a lot of money on prisons, and then this, you know, the bill comes out, and there's a lot of concern in and around individual rights, and that you know, if you're protesting, that you might be considered terrorists. You know, I've heard a lot of chatter in and around that, but from your perspective, you know, how do you feel about that, the Bill C-51?
I think it's kind of like a scare tactic. You know, if he says, if the Harper government says, okay, we're gonna lay down these new laws, and a lot of these laws are omnibus, right? They're all collectively put together, and then they, behind closed doors,
Sneak a few things in.
Pretty much.
and then they get it passed, right? So, you know, and we know what's going on. We know what they're doing. And when the Harper government uses scare tactics, you know, to say, hey, we're gonna make it a law, so if anybody tries to gather or they're gonna try and get in the way of our work, then, you know, they're gonna be labeled as terrorists. And so I just learned that the Harper government is gonna spend $60 billion on with the, what do they call it, military, the boats and
Navy.
jets and the Navy, and it goes on and on. That's $60 billion, right? But yet, you know, yet for us, it's pretty sad, because when we're trying to stand up for our mother, you know, when we go and protest against the pipelines, and with the Harper government selling our natural resources to other countries, you know, he doesn't have that strong relationship to the land, so he wouldn't even understand. Like, if he's going to sell all our natural resources, throw our people in jail, and, you know, spend all this money on the military, then he's not really respecting the indigenous people here and our sovereignty, because we believe we're nations. We signed treaties with the Queen, that nation and our nation. We didn't sign any treaties with the government, but they're trying to impose all these policies on our people to control us and to divide us. And so all these things that, like, no matter what they put in front of us, we're always going to survive. We survived the Oka crisis. We've survived smallpox. We survived, you know, Indian residential school. We survived all these things. And our nation, we need to work together, and we need to, you know, just like that medicine wheel, that hoop of the nation. When we all work together, then we're going to make change. We're going to make changes.
Go ahead.
Do you think there's value in Indigenous peoples and organizations focused on the, I guess, concerns of Indigenous peoples, connecting with other social movements or social organizations? So, I guess groups
Like,
from...
you're talking like the I Don't Know More movement, connecting
Yeah.
with Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, exactly.
You
So
know,
do you think there's
because
value
there's a common interest
Right.
that might be there, and that's a good point, because I think that there are a lot of grassroots organizations that are kind of, you know, I'm doing my thing, you're doing your thing, that person's doing their thing.
And it makes sense to a point, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody kind of has certain issues that would matter more to a particular group for whatever reason. But I think there's
But then it's
room
easy
for
for the government, or, you know, whomever the powers that be are, to kind of keep people separated.
right.
and not address the common goal. So that's a good thought. Do you work with other organizations?
At this time,
Mm-hmm.
my wife and I, we just moved into Toronto.
Okay.
We're like newbies, so we're engaging with the community here,
Okay.
the Indigenous community,
Mm-hmm.
and we offer a training as an ally to kind of bridge that gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous.
Yeah.
Right.
And as you can see on my wife's hand drum here, there's that feather that, you know, has that I don't know more
Mm-hmm.
movement, and everybody in this medicine wheel is related. Like the black people, the red people, the yellow people, and the white people. We're all related.
Mm-hmm.
And what the I don't know more movement is when we all work together. You know, we're not only helping our children, but we're helping all of the Canadians.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when they talk about fracking and that, you know, they're actually damaging the water. And when you damage the water, there's a whole bunch of things that happen after that.
Yeah.
Like, you need the water will, you know, you poison the water, you're killing the trees,
Killing everything.
killing the animals that
Yeah.
we live with. We live in this land, right? And that's just part of our livelihood. The people down west, they depend on that salmon. The
Mhm.
fish depend on that salmon.
Mm-hmm.
And so all these things there's even earthquakes going on in the middle of, you know, in Saskatchewan and Alberta.
Because of the fracking, yeah.
And they're like, what's going on here? Well, it's the fracking, you
Yeah.
know. They're putting chemicals in the water and in those plates. It's really, it's a real shame because the people that are cashing in on this, they don't care about our children, our grandchildren,
Mhm.
and the ones in the next generation. So it's kind of like, that's what this symbol is like we're standing up for our nation, our people, our identity, and we're standing up for Mother Earth because we want our children to have what we have today,
Mhm.
and more, because we love them so much.
There's okay, so we've got about 20 minutes left.
All right.
And I want to turn this around a little bit because there are a plethora of challenges. You know, from the impact of residential schools on the individuals that were there, that impact following to the children and the grandchildren and so on. You know, the impact of the broken treaties, the fact that a lot of the reservations are substandard. You mentioned that, you know, it's living in a third world situation where in drinking water, I think in something like 60 or 70% of the reservations, from what I heard, is not safe to drink.
Right.
A lot of times there's airlifting that has to be done from different reservations, moving them out of other places because of flooding, because of where the reservations are and things were built. The homes, like the list goes on and on and on in terms of what the challenges are. We've got about 20 minutes left, and I want to talk about some of the positive things that are happening, some of the solutions that are happening, and as well as how can we all kind of put pressure on the government to push for more change. Something you talked about earlier, and that was for you from your own experience. You said you'd mentioned a drug and alcoholic situation, and then through your rediscovering your spirituality, that helped you through that process. Maybe you could give us a little insight into that, because for many of us, we're I know for myself, I'm not 100% clear on you know, the spiritual aspect of your culture, and I know that through the residential school, the Catholic Church and Anglican Church, they also had a quote unquote spiritual impact on you as well. So how do you sift through the religion that's been kind of imposed on you, and the state that you were in, and then to rediscovering yourself in a way, and your connection to Turtle Island?
Well, I remember when I was a little boy, I'd go visit my grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
and on the wall she had a picture of the Last Supper, and she'd have a cross over here. But she was a healer and a medicine woman,
Mm-hmm.
and people would come from all over the place to come and get doctored with her. And she had that gift to work for Creator, the Great Spirit, and to help these people to get their health back. And I used to wonder, like, why does my grandmother have a cross and a pipe, you know? And it took me a long time to really understand that, you know, there's only one Creator, but there's many paths to get to, you know, to get to heaven. And it's through my grandmother. Like, she used to take me to the sweat lodge, and I used to help her with her ceremonies. I'd help her at the Sundance. I'd help her with the giveaway ceremonies, and I was always, they call us Uskapeos, or a helper. And I was her little helper, my brothers and I. And it really made a huge difference in when I really needed help. So when I fell back to my culture, when I returned to my culture, I remember going to the sweat lodge, and I remember my grandmother saying, you know, you can ask for anything you want, but you got to use that tobacco to ask for what you want. And so I always remember that. And when I seen the cross and, you know, like the way my grandmother lived her life, I understood that she respected other religions, you know, despite what happened. Despite what happened with Indian residential schools and what happened, my grandmother taught me that to forgive, you know, to learn to forgive. And I think that's really powerful, is when you learn to forgive and then move on with your life, because life is just full of adventures, you know, life is full of opportunities, and it's abundant. There's so much out there. But to me, that was really crucial in my recovery from alcohol and drugs.
So being able to get to a place where you could forgive and let go of a lot of the past.
Yes, you can. When I learned to forgive, you know, it was difficult because I was angry growing up, and when I learned to learn what I was doing, like using all these coping mechanisms and turning to alcohol and turning to drugs, and once I learned to forgive myself and to be honest with myself, then I began to have a better understanding of what's important. How do I get more balance in my life, more in my medicine wheel?
What would you say to somebody who would say, you know, the residential schools, that was so 1960s, you know, you're in the new millennium now, it's you know, that's water under the bridge. What would you say to somebody like that?
That's kind of the attitude that I notice out there, is people are saying, just get over it, you know? And for me, it's like, that's why I kind of designed this program of ours. And our program educates people on a true history that people never knew. So if you don't know what you don't know,
you don't know.
So you don't know. But now that you have this understanding, and it's going to happen. The government is actually indigenizing the universities, they're indigenizing the colleges, they're indigenizing the healthcare system, they're indigenizing everything that, you know, and that's part of the reconciliation, is to make sure that this doesn't happen again, ever, because it was cultural genocide, you know. And
I think that's what in the report it said that.
Yeah.
Right.
Although Stephen Harper's unwilling to say that, but
he'll probably never say it. But I guess one of the key things to come out is for the culture to leave room for the culture in every aspect of Canadian society, right? So if you're indigenizing the universities and you're indigenizing the healthcare system, it means you're actually acknowledging it and like making room for it to, I guess, dwell there.
Yeah, of course. Even in the Corrections Canada, you know, the court system, they're saying the lawyers should know about this. And there's a lot of universities, there's even a push for anybody that comes to get a Canadian degree, they should have this knowledge. So the people are...
That would be powerful.
People that are getting degrees in biology or whatever, you know, different different areas, they're like, why do we need to notice? We don't need to notice. But it's kind of like answering that call to action to indigenize the Canadian, have that awareness that what really happened to our people, you know.
How can people support you, support your group, support the direction that you're going? Are you nonprofit? Can people donate money? Can they volunteer their time?
People, because Bear Standing Tall and Associates has a holistic approach, they can apply to our program. And our program, there's no prerequisites. We design it for 40 hours. So it's just like the same amount of time you go take a university course or a college course. And there's no really requirements, just that desire to learn about the true history of colonization. And then when, for us to offer that, you know, it gives us, with our holistic approach, it actually makes us feel good. And that dream that I had, you know, I'm fulfilling that dream that I had. And so it's really, you know, when I wake up in the morning and I always say, what am I going to do today that's going to make an impact on people? And when I go to the office and we try and, you know, build our business and that, you know, we've had calls from people that are lawyers want to take our program. There's students that already have degrees, they take our program. And we have.
But how can we, like the general public, is there a need that your organization has that
not necessarily to take the program, but to support the program.
To support you. So I don't know, financially or volunteering
They can go to our website and there's a like button at medicinewheeltrainer.com. There's a like and there's a share button.
Okay, so they can connect with you there.
Yeah, and if there's somebody that doesn't know anything about the residential school, but they don't have the grade 12 or they don't have the requirements, they can still come into our program also. Okay. So
we've got a few minutes left, and I want to get some quick thoughts from you on a few things, and some of them we've talked about in depth. But there's an election coming up. And there, you know, like we talked about earlier at the beginning of the program, wherein the new Miss Universe is not exactly all that happy with the Harper government. And, you know, there's been various conversations about Tom Mulcair and Justin Trudeau and who should people vote for. Not that you're going to tell people who they should vote for, but, you know, I want you to give me your thoughts on how or what. So Stephen Harper is in power right now. Justin Trudeau and Tom Mulcair would like to get in power, and they've been making lots of promises. Everybody's making promises right now. So maybe you could talk about, you know, from an Aboriginal perspective, your thoughts on the three candidates and pardon me?
Three parties.
The three parties. Okay. And you know, and what it is that they're offering, and you know, for those who are listening who might be trying to get a little bit more aware as to the challenges, maybe you could help to steer us in a little bit of a direction in that. So let's start off with Tom Mulcair, and what are your thoughts?
I really like what the announcement that he made, that within 100 days he would do that. What is it called? That.
Is it
was that one? He's launching a
inquiry.
Oh, the inquiry for the
the
inquiry.
Sorry, I said
launching that inquiry
yes.
to missing and murdered Indigenous women.
Yeah, I know that's been a bit of a challenge over the years, you know, there's been a big push for that.
And it's something Stephen Harper flat out refuses to do.
He said it was not needed at one point.
He doesn't support that, or it's on the back burner.
Yeah,
and so. You know, I really like what Tom, how do you say his last name?
The
NDP.
Yeah, the NDP.
The NDP. I like what they're offering or what they're promising. You know, because we need to respect our women. We need to respect the life givers and their children and then the ones that are coming, the unborn. And once we start to have that shift where we depend on the life givers, for direction.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's really important. And when you
Quickly, for those who don't know, this inquiry is based on what? Because there's some people may not, they might be hearing some talk, but they don't even know why this is needed or what's it about.
Yeah. Well, it's a study just like the Truth and Reconciliation,
Mm-hmm.
where they really dig deep into the statistics.
Mm-hmm.
And when right now they're saying there's like 11 or 1,200 missing and murdered. But from my perspective,
Mm-hmm.
there's millions. You know, there's at the residential school they have these graves that were unmarked, and in those graves are piles of bones from both women or children, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when the settlers came over here, and when they gave us smallpox, or they outright murdered small tribes to get,
Mm-hmm.
what about those people? You know, this has been going on for a long time. I don't know where the 1,000 came from. There's actually millions,
Okay.
And so I think that's what that inquiry is going to uncover. Is going to uncover a lot of information.
Mm-hmm.
So with the conservatives, it's almost like opening up a can of worms. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I
shouldn't say that, but I'm going to change the connotation. It's actually going in something that's so shameful to the Canadian government. Like, they're ashamed. And if this thing surfaces, it's going to be throwing salt on the wound. They're like, look at this. Like, now it's like millions of people.
And their count that they're using is within the last 30 years. So it's not a full
picture.
So now with the Inquirer, it's going to be like a whole study, and it's really important.
So the NDP, you like the fact that they want to do this. They're on board with getting this inquiry happening.
Well, I would really like to see that $60 billion spent on that inquiry, and then we can have a really great report. And what
I'm
can
hoping
we
they
do
won't
to
spend $60 billion.
What can we do to redress?
Where's it even coming from? That's what I want to know.
So what can we do to redress that situation? And there's a lot of things that people can do.
Okay. What about Trudeau? Any thoughts on him? On his part, the Liberals Party,
or
and
the Green Party?
Elizabeth May and the Green Party too.
Yeah, the Trudeau. I know there's a lot of bashing out there, and I try not to judge, and I try not to fall into the the bashing. And plain and simple, I don't even really listen to the news, because news is always like
somebody spins.
Yeah, it's a lot of mudslinging and that, and I like to keep my mind focused on healing and wellness. And how can I make this place how can I make Canada a better place for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, and also the people that come from different countries. And my philosophy is, if you're going to work here in Canada, in our backyard with our people, you have to know the history, the true history. So that's kind of like what I focus on. I'm not a political person.
Okay.
But I listen to what they say, and I know the candidates are always coming up with good stuff so they can
hopefully
making promises,
get supporters.
So
get a job.
I don't know if I don't know if that's the right thing to do, is to depend on the government for change, especially when 100 years there's nothing really changed. We're still living in poverty. Our people are still, they're cutting funding right now. They're essential funding for essential services.
Yep.
They're still cutting it. It's like long time ago, they would have the Indian agent. The Indian agent would give the people food rations, and if you pissed him off, he would, he would only give you a little bit, just a few scraps, or they would cut everybody off totally.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening again. It's like
they just cut out the middleman.
The Indian agent, it's almost like the Indian Affairs Minister now. What's his name?
I can't remember his name, but I know who you mean.
Everybody knows who he is.
Yeah.
So he's saying like we're gonna start cutting off essential services. So that's the same thing that's happening again.
Yeah.
So if we go out there and we go and vote,
Mm-hmm.
is it gonna really make a difference? You know, the government's been lying to us and promising all these things and change. Over 100 years, we're still in almost the same situation. Like the money we get for housing hasn't changed since the 80s.
Yeah.
Everything
else
money
has changed.
the money we get for education is still based on 80s and 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not, and the Aboriginal
really
Affairs,
nothing's
they have
changed.
$1 billion that they're holding from us, and yet they're still trying to cut
more
bands. And my reserve, Onion Lake Cree Nation, is taking, going to the United Nations.
Okay, so I've got like, I don't know, another minute or two left here.
Ashley Burnham.
1 minute before Jason cuts us off
1
here.
minute?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do appreciate you guys coming on the show. I know we didn't really get into a lot of the other things that we wanted to talk about today, and maybe in the future I can get you guys to come back and we can spend a little bit of time speaking on some more specifics. With the elections coming up, I do hope that for all the listeners out there, you do pay attention to all the candidates and what their stance are, because some of the things that you said earlier, we are all connected. And what happens within your community happens within my community, happens within everyone's community. And so it's very important that we sort of stand together and support each other. What's the name of your website again?
MedicineWheelTrainer.com.
So if people can go to MedicineWheelTrainer.com and check it out and take some courses. Thank you very much for joining us today on the show, and have a great long weekend.
All right, thanks for having us.
Rare groove, revival, slow jams, upfront, old school.
The best music around in stereo sound.
Music back to back to back. iLive Radio. The best internet radio station around. iLive Radio, the new social network.
How you doing? What's good? It's Nkechi the Lyrical, sitting in my zone here, vibing and listening to iLive. And if you don't know, get to know. And if you do know, you don't know. And if you know, then relax and enjoy the ride.
From the moment God took woman out of man, we both have been trying to find our way back to each other. Yet the struggle we face seems monumental in nature. Are we destined to sit on the opposite sides of the coin we call humanity? Can the age-old question that separates us ever be answered? Soothe My Soul presents Mars Venus with your host, Patrick O'Morris. Tune in live every Sunday at 2 o'clock p.m. from the iLive studios in Toronto at www.iliveradio.com or on your cell phone, mobile.ilive.com. Join us and participate in the conversation via Twitter at Patrick Morris or in the chat room at ilivewebradio.com.
Welcome to iLive Radio. Hi, I'm ODJ, your host from Amalgamation in Sound. Join me every Saturday from 6 to 8 p.m. where I'll bring you the very best in UK soul, house, broken beat and everything in between. Remember to join in every Saturday 6 to 8 p.m. for Amalgamation in Sound. See you there.